Hey guys, tonight's story might be a little quieter, but under the surface it hums with tension, secrecy, and centuries of silence. We're slipping back into the Middle Ages, not to talk about knights or castles, but to understand what it meant to love differently in a world that didn't even have the words for it. Before we open that creaking door, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy this soft descent into uncomfortable history. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's something oddly comforting about seeing insomniacs check in from all corners of the planet. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that faint medieval breeze, and let's disappear into the dark together. You open your eyes. It's cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for a sweater, but the kind that feels like your bones have been soaking in vinegar overnight. The fire went out hours ago, and you never had enough wood to begin with. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a straw mat clinging to the damp earth like it's too exhausted to pretend anymore. You slept in your clothes again, rough wool, sweat stained, louse infested. They itch, they reek, and they whisper, "You're still alive," like a curse. You blink up at the ceiling and try not to breathe too deeply. There's a smell. There's always a smell. But today, it's not just the usual symphony of damp dog hair, goat urine, and week-old turnip stew fermenting in a bowl by the hearth. There's something else in the air. Attention. Like the world knows something about you before you've had the chance to forget it yourself. You're in England, or France, or maybe the Holy Roman Empire, which, spoiler alert, is none of those things. Geography is irrelevant, time even more so. All you need to know is the year starts with 13, ends with regret, and you're about to have a very long, very quiet day. You stretch, and instantly regret it. Your body groans like it's trying to sue you. Every joint files a complaint. You're 19, which, in medieval terms, is either prime marriage age or suspicious age to still be single. Your mother has noticed. The priest has noticed. Agnes down the lane has definitely noticed. And she's been sharpening her witch accusation voice just in case. You know the one. You get up, slowly. The chill clings to your skin like unpaid taxes. You pull your tunic tighter. The same one you've worn every day since last Pentecost. It's been mended 13 times, mostly with prayer, and one button from a dead relative's coat. You're not noble, not even close. You're what they call humble folk, which is code for dirt is your natural habitat. Outside, a rooster screams like it just found out it's dinner next week. Your stomach growls back. There's nothing to eat yet. Not until the chores are done, the prayers are said, and someone locates the chicken that keeps escaping through the side wall of the hovel like it's planning a breakout novel. You step outside and realise you forgot your shoes. Again. Not that they matter. They're two pieces of leather held together by string, betrayal, and mud. You walk to the well to fetch water. It's a short walk, but long enough to remember the dream you were having. The one with the boy from the village square. The one who smiled at you last week and made your chest feel like someone had lit a candle inside your ribs. You remember that dream for exactly 4 seconds before shoving it into the mental cellar where all your dangerous thoughts go. Lock it, forget it, again. Because here, that smile is not a gift. It's evidence That glance is not harmless, it's a sin. And that flutter in your stomach? That's your future crumbling before breakfast. The rules are unspoken, but universally understood. You can be poor. You can be sick. You can be a drunk, a thief, or a liar. But if you love the wrong way, the way that doesn't produce heirs, dowries, or political alliances, then you are wrong. Not just legally, theologically, philosophically, cosmically. You are an offence to the order of things, and there is no such thing as grace. You're not gay. That word won't exist for hundreds of years. Right now, the closest terms floating around are sodomite and abomination. Catchy, isn't it? Sounds like something a fire and brimstone monk would shout in a very echoey chapel. Because he would. Because they do. You've heard the sermons. The ones about cities burned from the sky, and people turned into salt for looking the wrong way at divine judgment. The ones that talk about unnatural love, like it's a contagion you can catch from a handshake or a shared prayer bench. You've learned to keep your hands folded, your voice even, your eyes down. You try to stay invisible. But invisibility here is a luxury. And you're too alive, too curious, too something to pass for harmless. The village isn't big. A few dozen huts. A church with a bell that rings like a guilt trip in metal form. A market square that smells like onions, wet wool, and despair. Everyone knows everyone. And everyone thinks they know you. You're the quiet one, the polite one, the one who didn't stare at Mary's neckline during Harvest Mass. The one who never brags about women, or sons you don't have, or wives you haven't beaten yet. People notice these things. Noticing is dangerous. You pass the butcher. He grunts. You nod. He sharpens a cleaver like it's a hobby and a warning. You pass a group of boys your age, laughing too loudly. One of them says something under his breath. The others snicker. You keep walking. You don't turn around. You've trained yourself not to. Because looking back might mean looking at someone, and looking is loaded. The village priest spots you from the chapel steps. He calls out your name, your real name, the one people say when they want you to feel included. You smile, the tight, obedient kind, and walk over. He asks if you'll be at Vespers tonight. Of course you will. You never miss Vespers. Because missing church is like drawing a target on your soul and handing out arrows. He talks to you about God, about discipline, about the dangers of temptation. He doesn't say what he means. He doesn't have to. He saw you last week, in the square. That smile, that glance, that moment that lasted too long. You nod, say all the right things, and keep your expression like freshly baked bread, warm but unreadable. Inside, your heart is cracking like old pottery. Not because you're afraid of him, you're used to that, but because part of you thought maybe, just maybe, someone else might understand. That smile, the boy's smile, maybe it wasn't just friendly. Maybe it wasn't just light through the fog. Maybe it meant something. But you know better. You always have. You fetch water. You return to the hut. Your mother is scolding your younger brother for tracking mud inside again. Your father is outside trying to fix the roof with a stick, a prayer, and 0 carpentry skills. You slip past them both and start preparing the hearth. No one knows. Not really, but they suspect. And suspicion is worse than proof, because it festers, grows teeth, turns into stories whispered during candlelight and passed around with stale bread and judgment. You once heard about a man from 3 villages over, a weaver, never married, liked music. Someone accused him of unholy behaviour. That was all it took. He vanished a week later. No trial, no explanation. Just gone. His home was looted. His goats were taken. His name scrubbed clean from memory like a stain on a monk's robe. When you asked what happened to him, your uncle just muttered, "God knows," and spat in the fire. God knows. That phrase, it floats around everywhere. People say it when they mean, we don't want to ask. Or worse, we don't have to. You sit by the fire. You stir the pot of watery stew. Your brother asks why you never talk about girls. You smile and say you're too busy working. He accepts this, for now. He's only 10, still believes in fairness, still believes people don't get hurt just for being. The food is terrible, the company is tolerable, and the silence is suffocating. There was a boy once, a real one, not just in dreams. You were both 13. You don't say his name anymore, not even in your head. He was from the neighbouring village, came during harvest season, with a group helping in the fields. He had dark eyes and a laugh that sounded like someone had forgotten to be afraid. You spent 4 afternoons working beside him, tying sheaves of wheat, while pretending not to steal glances. The 5th day, he asked if you wanted to sneak off after evening prayers. You did. The 2 of you sat under a crumbling wall at the edge of the fields and talked about stupid things. Goats, weather, whether soup could feel sadness. You laughed too much. Too freely. You brushed against his arm by accident. Or maybe not by accident. He didn't pull away. You still remember that. Because that memory has become your emergency blanket on cold nights. The one thing you tuck around your chest when the world is too sharp. The next day, he was gone. His uncle said he'd been called back early, but no one believed that. 2 days later, you found a scrap of fabric he'd tied around your wrist. You buried it, deep in the ground behind the house, like it was evidence. Because in a way, it was. Since then, you've been careful. Careful with your voice, with your words, with how you walk, with where your eyes land during Mass. Careful not to linger too long when the baker's son pulls off his tunic in the heat. Careful not to react when one of the other boys tells a joke about a man who walks like a woman. Careful not to smile too hard, or too soft, or at all, because you know. You know what they do? They don't just shame you. They don't just exile you. Sometimes they chain you. Sometimes they strip you. Sometimes they drag you through the square and let the stones do the rest. All for something you didn't ask for, didn't invent, didn't choose, just are. Your heart is a heresy. Your desire, a death sentence. And yet, it doesn't go away. Your aunt once said, during one of her wine-soaked sermons about sin and supper, that the devil comes in sweet things. She was talking about honey, but you understood. She meant you too. You start to wonder, is this what everyone feels? Or just you? Because sometimes the world feels like it's in on a joke you didn't get invited to. The boys in the village talk about marriage, and children like they're listing ingredients for a stew. None of them mention anything else. Not even a whisper. Not even a hint. And you wonder if they all feel it too, but are better at hiding it. Or if they really don't. And you're the cracked one. You try praying it away? Of course you do. Kneeling on cold stone, whispering desperate apologies to a silent altar, promising to be good, promising to be right, promising to stop dreaming about things that don't exist. You confess to things that aren't sins. You thank God for a mercy you've never felt. You leave the church emptier than when you walked in. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the silence. There's no name for what you are, no word for it, just echoes, condemnations, warnings wrapped in scripture, nothing to hold on to, no one to speak to, no books, no letters, no stories where someone like you gets to live. Only stories where they don't. You once heard a travelling friar speak about the perversions of the southern lands. He talked about cities where men lay with men in the open and claimed it was culture. His audience gasped. Someone spat. You tried not to breathe. But later that night, lying awake, you thought about those cities. Not as abominations, but as impossible miracles. Places where you wouldn't be the only one. Places where people looked like you. And didn't hide it. You know they're probably not real. Just stories. But stories are sometimes the only thing that keeps your ribs from collapsing. You hold that story like a relic. You once made a mistake. Not a big one. Not by modern standards. Just a pause. A glance. Do it 1 second longer than it should have been. It was summer. The hay smelled like dust and sunburn. You and the blacksmith's apprentice were hauling water together. His shirt stuck to him in the heat. He laughed at something. You can't remember what. And you looked at him. That was all. Just looked. And that might have been the end of it. Except, someone saw. A boy. Younger. Stupid. Bored. He said something later, loud enough for the baker's wife to hear. Loud enough that you heard it again 2 hours later, but with more venom, more detail. By sundown, the story had taken on a life of its own. You stared, you smiled, you touched. You followed him behind the chapel and did God knows what. The truth didn't matter, it never does. You didn't sleep that night. Your father didn't speak to you the next morning. Your mother watched you like you were a candle sputtering near the drapes. At market, people stared longer than usual. One man laughed too loudly when you passed. Another spit near your feet. The priest came by that evening. He didn't say why. He just stayed for tea. He watched you the whole time. The next day, your father woke you before dawn and sent you to stay with your cousin in the next village for the summer. You stayed for 8 months. When you came back, no one said anything, but they didn't forget. They never do. You learned to vanish after that. Not physically, spiritually. You made yourself smaller, duller. You stopped laughing in public. You stopped singing. You folded yourself into a polite silence and tried to live like someone who belonged. You did everything right, but it never felt like yours. Because deep down, under the layers of mud and piety, there is a part of you that still remembers. It remembers the warmth of that smile, the way your skin felt like it had been pulled into sunlight, the way your breath caught, not from fear, but from wonder, the way it felt to exist without apology, even if only for a heartbeat. And you wonder, will it ever happen again? Your cousin, the one you stayed with, wasn't unkind. He was older, had a wife, 3 kids. He said very little, which was a mercy. You helped with chores, ate your food, slept in the loft. On Sundays, you sat with them at Mass, head bowed, hands folded, pretending you weren't screaming inside. One night, after too much cider, your cousin asked why your father sent you away. You lied, of course, said there was a fight, said it wasn't about you, said nothing that mattered. He just nodded and said, "It's hard when people talk." That was it. No accusation, no sympathy, just a simple truth, spoken like an old injury. And for a moment, just a flicker, you wondered, did he know? Had he felt it too? Or was he just tired of pretending the world made sense? The truth is, you've become fluent in pretending, in wearing masks before they were metaphorical. You know how to listen without reacting, how to nod without agreeing, how to deflect questions with shrugs and biblical references. You've mastered the art of vanishing while standing still. But inside, you ache, not just from loneliness, though that is a constant companion, like hunger or cold or the itch from flea bites. No, it's deeper than that. It's the ache of being unwritten, of living in a world that has no name for you, no story, no place. Every other boy your age is being prepared for marriage, for land, for legacy. You're being prepared for silence. Sometimes you wonder, was there ever a time when this wasn't shameful? Were there cultures, ancient and distant, that held hands in the open? Whispered love into the night without fear? Painted their gods with soft eyes and open arms? You've heard rumours about the Greeks, about the Romans. You're not sure what's myth and what's history, but you cling to it anyway. Because even a false memory is better than this lonely truth. You imagine temples instead of chapels, statues instead of sermons, lovers instead of executioners. You imagine a world where someone like you might be loved, not in secret, not in fear, but fully. And then you wake up and remember where you are. The bell rings for midday prayer. You walk to the chapel like everyone else, hands folded, eyes down. You sit in the third row from the back, between a woman who smells like onions and a boy who keeps scratching his scalp like it owes him money. The priest begins. He talks about sin, about purity, about the dangers of giving in to the flesh. He never says your name, but he doesn't have to. Every word lands like a lash, every verse like a verdict. You recite the prayers, mouthing the Latin like a curse you don't believe in. You bow when told, kneel when told, rise when told. You do it all. Because that's what safety looks like. Conformity in motion. Afterwards, the boy next to you asks if you're coming to the evening bonfire. You say maybe. He nods, then runs ahead, joining a group already throwing sticks into the pile, like they're building warmth instead of warding off silence. You stay behind. Walk slower. You're always walking slower. You think about running. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But someday. Leaving everything behind. Finding a city. A coast. A monastery where no one asks too many questions. Or a forest so deep that even God gets lost in it. You've heard of places where people go when they don't belong. Pilgrims, exiles, vagabonds. Maybe you could be one of them. You don't want much, just a place where you're not a ghost in your own life. Night falls early here. The dark isn't a time of rest. It's a curtain. One that hides nothing and reveals too much. There are no streetlights, no gentle hum of civilization. Just cold air, snapping firewood, and the sound of your thoughts echoing louder than the chapel bell. You lie on your straw mat, staring up at the ceiling beams, tracing the wood grain with your eyes like it's a map out of this place. Your family sleeps around you. Someone snores. Someone coughs. A baby whimpers in its sleep. Life goes on around you. No one knows you're crumbling in real time. You think about writing it down. somehow, hiding it under a floorboard or carving it into the inside of a tree trunk. Just something that says, I was here, I felt this, I didn't choose it, and I didn't deserve the silence. But you don't, because even that would be dangerous. So instead, you carry it inside you, like a stone lodged in the chest. Heavy, permanent, a reminder. You're not special. That thought comes often. You're not a saint, not a martyr. You're just someone who looked at the world one day and realised you weren't invited to it properly. Like you showed up at a feast and everyone else got a seat, but you got a warning. You learned to sit on the edge, smile politely, applaud the bride and groom, drink the bitter wine and say it's sweet. You wonder how many others are doing the same. You've seen the way two older men in the village glance at each other, then glance away faster. You've heard the way one of the washerwomen talks about her roommate with too much softness for a woman she supposedly shares just rent with. Maybe they know. Maybe they're just as scared. You wonder if there's a secret language, not in words, but in gestures, in hesitations, in held breaths and hands that hover just an inch too long over the bread at market. Maybe survival isn't about silence. Maybe it's about subtlety. Knowing who to look at, and who to never look at again. You wish someone had told you sooner, but maybe there's no one to tell. Just more of you, scattered like smudged ink on a page no one wants to read. There are stories, whispered ones, of places far away, cities where rules are different, ports filled with sailors and saints who don't ask too many questions, streets where no one cares who you smile at. You've never seen them. You might never get to. But still, they shimmer in your imagination like the last embers of a dying fire. They might be lies. You don't care. Lies can be warm. You used to think God hated you. It's what the priest said, after all, that yours was a sin against nature, that your feelings were a test, that your desires were nails in the hands of Christ. You believed it for a while. You prayed harder. You fasted longer. You walked barefoot through penance like it might scrub your soul clean. But you still dreamed. And if God made you, then he made the dreams too, didn't he? Maybe that's heresy. But maybe heresy is just hope with bad branding. You've started to believe quietly in a God who sees you, who knows you, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't spit. A God who understands the difference between cruelty and love. You don't pray out loud anymore. You pray in thoughts, in looks, in the way your fingers curl around a memory when the world feels sharp. And in those moments when it's late, and the wind howls through the cracks in the hut walls like a ghost looking for someone to haunt, you feel a warmth that has nothing to do with fire. And maybe that's something. Maybe that's enough. One day you might leave. Not as a runaway, but as a ghost that chose its own haunting. You'll disappear like all the others before you, and no one will say why. They'll just nod and whisper and move on. But you'll know. You'll find your city, or your forest, or someone who looks at you, not with suspicion, but with recognition. You'll find a place where your name doesn't echo like a threat. You'll find someone who sees the same loneliness in you and doesn't look away. Maybe that place doesn't exist. Maybe it's a lie, but even lies can be destinations. And until then, you'll keep waking up in this body, in this time, in this silence. You'll walk with your head bowed, but your eyes open. You'll speak softly, but you'll keep your thoughts loud. You'll survive. Because you have to. Because even here, in this dirt, in this fear, in this constant act of self-erasure, you are still you. And no one, not even time, can take that away. You live in a box, not a neat one, not the kind that closes properly or fits snugly into the corner of a shelf. No, yours is the kind of box that's been kicked too many times, left out in the rain, gnawed by goats, and held together by rot, superstition, and cold breath. It's a house, technically. A hut, more accurately. One room, low ceiling, dirt floor. No windows, because windows are for people who have something worth looking out at. The walls are made of wattle and daub. That's sticks smeared with a hearty blend of clay, mud, straw, and livestock regret. Sometimes, in the right weather, you can see your neighbour through the cracks, and smell him, and his soup. Your roof? Thatched, which means it leaks when it rains, sags when it snows, and houses an entire extended family of rats who host nightly conferences just above your face. You've named one of them Brother Geoffrey. You think he judges you. There's no chimney, just a smoke hole, which is a romantic way of saying, yes, we willingly hotbox ourselves with carbon monoxide because chimneys are expensive and the fire makes the bugs sleepy. You share this space with 6 humans, 2 chickens, and 1 dog that may or may not belong to you. Privacy is a theory. Personal space is a joke. Every cough, fart, and midnight existential sigh echoes like a sermon in a hollow skull. Your bed is the same as everyone else's. A straw-stuffed sack that's somehow both damp and crunchy. It smells like the ghost of every bad harvest you've survived. The fleas are not pets, but they are loyal. You've stopped trying to kill them. They have names now. Blankets, a single piece of wool, woven in despair, and never once washed, because water is precious, and soap is a fantasy. It weighs the same as a tired goat and smells worse. You huddle under it each night like a fugitive hiding from the weather. You sleep in your clothes. Of course you do. You only have 1 outfit, 2, if you count dreams. It's a tunic, itchy, patched, and dyed the colour of medieval depression, brown. Under it, maybe linen if you're lucky, skin if you're not. There are no undergarments. That's a luxury for the Virgin Mary and the very rich. Your thighs haven't felt a breeze in years. And the boots? What boots? You walk barefoot, through mud, through dung, through disease puddles and chicken business. Sometimes you wear wooden clogs. Sometimes those clogs break. Sometimes you wear shame. That never breaks. Let's talk about laundry. You don't do it. Not often anyway. Because laundry requires 3 things you almost never have: water, heat, and time. To wash your tunic, you'd need to haul buckets from the nearest well. Heat them over a fire you don't have fuel for. Scrub your clothes with ashes or lye that burns your skin, and hang them outside, where they'll promptly freeze, disappear, or be eaten by someone hungrier than you. So instead, you wear the same thing until it crusts into a wearable shell. Your body adapts. Your nose stops noticing. Your neighbours stop standing close. It's a system. The smell of your life is layered. At the base, sweat. Deep, historical sweat. The kind that lives in the walls and under your fingernails. Then there's smoke from the hearth, from the torches, from the neighbour's attempt to cook soup with dried moss and hope. Over that, a fine mist of livestock. Goat, pig, possibly something dead under the floorboards. Then the food: boiled cabbage, turnip peelings, old barley pottage that's been reheated so many times it has its own calendar. Finally, the human element: breath, feet, regret. Candles? Rare, expensive. You light one only for prayer, punishment, or hiding your sins from the dark. Otherwise your world is firelight and shadow. Everything flickers, including your sense of safety. You don't have a door. Not really. Just a hanging cloth or a wooden plank you can wedge into place. It creaks when touched. Sometimes it falls over entirely. Your home is not a fortress. It's a suggestion. An open-air concept for medieval suffering. There's a single stool, a fire pit, a shelf with a bowl, a knife, and a spoon that's been passed down so many generations it has a name, the good one. There's no table, no mirror, no glass, no lock. If someone wants to enter, they will. And if you want to keep them out, you better be strong, rich, or invisible. You are none of those things. Let's talk about being visible. You are a body, in space, in dirt, in constant danger of being looked at the wrong way. You can't afford flamboyance. Not in fabric. Not in tone. Not in posture. You must be as forgettable as the fourth bowl of boiled barley. You've seen what happens to people who aren't. The traveller who wore blue velvet. The apprentice who hummed songs that weren't church-sanctioned. The widow who laughed too loudly and once kissed another woman on the cheek for slightly too long. They vanish. Or worse, they stay. But only as warnings. Your clothes don't express. They disguise. You're not dressing to live. You're dressing to survive. There's something crawling on your leg. It could be a flea. Could be a louse. Could be a beetle with poor decision-making skills. You don't flinch. You don't react. You just sigh, shift your weight, and hope it loses interest. Because that's life now. You, cohabiting with insects in a passive-aggressive truce. They don't bite too hard, and you don't set yourself on fire. You itch constantly. But scratching is dangerous. It draws attention. It lifts the curtain on all the things you don't want to think about. Rashes, bites, infections. So you do it discreetly, like sinning in reverse. Your scalp is a battlefield. You comb it once a week with a bone comb, so old it probably predates morality. You've found eggs in your hair before. You've tried rinsing with vinegar once, but that just made your head smell like a bad salad. So now you live with the lice. You've named them too. There's a little family that seems to favour your left temple. You call the big one Father Cletus. Bathing is theoretical. There's no bathtub, no soap, no concept of self-care. You clean yourself in fragments, a splash of water on the face, a rinse of your hands if you've been handling something especially cursed, like rotten turnips or human teeth. A full body wash? That's a festival event. And even then, you boil the water, pour it into a leaking wooden tub, climb in while your siblings scream at the door, and exit the experience somehow dirtier than you began. People say bathing is dangerous, that it opens the pores and lets disease in. And you believe them. Mostly because the last man in your village who insisted on weekly baths died of something people refused to name. You think it was envy. Your feet are not feet anymore. They're hooves with opinions. Cracked, caked, blistered. The skin is so tough. You once stepped on a hot coal and didn't notice until your brother started screaming. You tried soaking them once, but the water turned grey, then black, then gave up and evaporated out of spite. Your nails are long. Your knuckles are raw. Your body is a complaint someone etched into meat. But there's no time to rest, no ointment, no healing balm. There's only dirt and hope. And the occasional mushroom poultice that smells like abandonment. And the air? Oh, the air. It's never clean. It smells of fire and fear, of piss and pottage, of old wood and wet wool and the lingering ghost of meat that's gone off. In the summer, the air sours. In the winter, it freezes to your nose hairs. Every breath is a gamble. Every inhale a little prayer that you don't get a lungful of someone else's sins. Smoke clings to you. You reek of it. Your skin, your tunic, your eyelashes, all coated in the constant residue of survival. You've stopped noticing. Others haven't. But they can't judge, because they reek too. You all do. It's a collective stench. A communal fog of bodily offence. If you could bottle it, it would be called eau de résignation. Let's talk rodents. You have them. Of course you do. Rats, mostly. Sometimes mice. Sometimes something that's technically a ferret, but acts like a burglar with tiny knives for teeth. They scurry through the rafters. They steal your bread. They bite your toes if they're feeling brave. You've learned to sleep with your feet tucked under your knees, not for comfort, but for self-defense. You've tried to trap them. They outsmart you. You tried to pray them away. God remained suspiciously quiet. You once named one, after a saint, hoping for mercy. It bit you. You've accepted them now. As roommates? As witnesses? As the audience to your slow, itchy decline. There's a draft that never ends. It doesn't matter how many animal skins you stuff into the walls, how many holes you plug with straw, how many prayers you whisper into the gaps. The wind always finds you. It slips under the door like gossip. It sneaks down your collar like betrayal. In the dead of night, it curls around your ankles and whispers, "You will never be warm again." And it's right. At night, the cold sharpens, not metaphorically. You can feel it physically, slicing through the gaps in the wall, gathering at your feet like a malicious fog, rising up your spine until it wraps around your lungs. You curl into yourself like an apology and try to sleep through the shivers. It doesn't work. It never works. Sleep isn't restful. It's just the least painful state available. You lie in the same position until your hip aches, flip over, then lie still again until your shoulder goes numb. There's no blanket thick enough, no posture soft enough, no corner warm enough. Just hours of bargaining with the dark. Sometimes you wake in the middle of the night and can't tell if it's rats in the ceiling or your own heartbeat. You hold your breath and listen. To the wind, to the dog, to the faint scratch of straw beneath someone else's restless foot. You exist in a shared room, a shared life, a shared fear, and yet you've never felt more alone. Privacy doesn't exist here. It's not just rare, it's inconceivable. You dress in front of others. You relieve yourself with a wooden bucket 5 feet from your mother. You cry silently, face down in your mat, so no one asks questions you can't answer. If you're lucky, no one hears. If you're not, they pretend they didn't. That's the real mercy. In the summer, the air shifts, not for the better, just in a new direction. The heat settles on your skin like glue. Your tunic sticks to your back. The stink of the village intensifies to a level that feels almost sentient. Flies gather in the corners like prophets of doom. They land on your lips, your eyes, your food. You wave them away half-heartedly, already defeated. You can't undress. Not in this place. Not in this life. Exposing your body is dangerous, not just for modesty, but for scrutiny. Any deviation, any softness, any shape not aligned with their expectations is fuel for suspicion. Your body is not your own. It's a battleground of assumptions. You've trained your hands to move like everyone else's. Strong, efficient, masculine. You've watched the way men walk, the way they gesture, the way they spit with casual aggression. You've imitated them all. Some days the performance holds. Some days it falters. Some days they notice. Clothing is misery worn in layers. Your tunic scratches constantly, like it's made of sandpaper and Catholic guilt. The underlayer, if you have one, is usually damp, always itchy, stained with things you can't remember and don't want to examine. There's no laundry rotation, no seasonal wardrobe, no comfort, just the same handful of threads, day after day, until they unravel. Or you do. Your feet bleed sometimes, especially in winter, when the ground freezes harder than the priest's smile. Cracks form across your heels like angry maps. You stuff the holes in your shoes with moss, rags, hope. None of them last. Sometimes you walk barefoot, through frost, through manure, through places that used to be people. The pain is background noise now. Just one more detail in a body that doesn't feel like it belongs anywhere. Food leaves residue, not just in your mouth, though that too. The taste of spoiled root vegetables and overboiled barley doesn't vanish. It lingers. It seeps into your skin, into your clothes, into the air around you. You smell like hunger with a hint of mildew. The cooking fire burns low because fuel is expensive. You eat fast, in silence, surrounded by people who all wear the same expression. That tight-jawed endurance of those who understand that pleasure is for after death, not before it. After meals, the smell hangs in the hut like a curse. Smoke and turnips and goat fat, all rotting gently together. You open the door. The stench remains. You breathe it in because you have no choice. Everything's always slightly rotten. The water, the food, the air, sometimes even the people. Your skin breaks out, of course it does. Rashes flare up under your arms, along your thighs. The constant damp, the friction of wool, the scratching, it all becomes too much. You have no balm, no ointment. You try lard once. It makes it worse. Your mother tells you to rub it with sage. The village healer tells you it's punishment for an imbalance of temperament. You nod. You always nod. The real diagnosis? You live in filth and fear. There's no word for that in their medicine books. You pass the same two women every morning on the way to collect water. They always stop talking when you walk by, always glance at each other. Their silence is louder than gossip. You smile once, early on. They didn't smile back. You haven't tried since. The well smells faintly of decay. Something might have died in it. Animal, vegetable, no one knows. But no one's going to find another well either. So you drink what you must. You hope the fire boils it enough. You ignore the grit at the bottom of the bucket. Every sip is a dare. There's nowhere clean. Not your hands, not your bed, not your soul. Everything you touch is caked in something. Dirt, mould, suspicion, smoke. You can't scrub it off. Even if you tried, it would just come back. The land itself seems to produce grime. It clings to you, like the church clings to power. Once, you spent an entire afternoon cleaning yourself as best you could. You used the rain barrel. You scraped yourself with a dull knife. You rubbed your arms raw with a cloth that used to be part of a shroud. Afterward, you stood in the doorway, dripping, shivering, and somehow still not clean. Your aunt told you to cover up. There are things men should not see, she said. You bit your tongue before you told her. There are things I can never be seen as. Even the animals judge you. The goat gives you side-eye. The chickens scatter when you approach. The dog growls only when you laugh. It's possible you're projecting, but in a place where nothing is yours, not your body, not your room, not your love, a bad-tempered goat starts to feel like a metaphor. You'd leave if you could. But the road out is long, muddy, watched. And if you disappear too suddenly, questions follow. Questions lead to accusations. Accusations lead to confessions. And confessions never end well. So you stay, in this hut, in this tunic, in this skin. You fold your identity into corners. Stuff it behind your ribs. Hide it beneath layers of wool and silence. You endure. Because endurance is the only thing you're allowed to have. The sun isn't up yet, but you are. Because in the Middle Ages, time isn't something you measure. It's something that happens to you. And when the sky turns from pitch to ash, and the rooster decides it's time for his daily existential scream, you get up. Not because you want to, because you have to. Your muscles hurt before you even move. There's a kink in your neck from sleeping wrong, and a dull ache in your back that's been there since last harvest. Your knees crack like a bishop's conscience. Your hands feel like sacks of gravel. But you sit up. You dress. You start. Because that's what survival is here. The absence of choice. There's no schedule. No planner. No work-life balance. Your life is work. It begins before dawn and ends when your body gives out. That's not poetic. That's literal. You rise with the sun. You collapse with the dark. And everything in between is just movement and noise and blistered repetition. If you're a man, you head to the fields. If you're a woman, you do everything else. If you're neither, both, or something else entirely, congratulations. Society doesn't acknowledge your existence, but still expects your labour. You don't have a trade. You're not a merchant or a scribe or someone who gets to sit down during the day. You're a peasant. That means you farm land that belongs to someone else, pay taxes you can't afford, and get blamed for everything from crop failure to rain that arrives 2 weeks too late. You start with the animals. Always, the goat has escaped again. She does this for fun, or revenge. You drag her back by the horns while she screams like she's being exercised. The chickens are either dead, missing, or demonic. The pig looks at you with the weary gaze of someone who knows it's being fattened for a winter stew and has accepted its fate. You feed them anyway, because if they die, so do you. Then it's your turn. Breakfast is a wooden bowl of pottage, that thick, flavourless medieval paste made from yesterday's leftovers, plus some new sadness stirred in. You eat it quickly, standing up, because the longer you wait, the colder it gets. And cold pottage is like eating wet regret. There's no tea, no coffee, just thin ale or water if you're feeling brave and forgetful of the plague. You finish your food. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve. You step outside. And that's when the real work begins. The field waits. It always waits. You plough it with tools that haven't been updated since the Romans packed up and left. A wooden hoe, a bent iron spade, a rusted sickle. If you're lucky, there's an ox. If you're unlucky, you're the ox. The soil is hard, rocky, unforgiving. It fights you with every step. Your boots sink into the mud. Your hands blister. Your spine screams. But you keep going. Because if you don't plant, you don't harvest. If you don't harvest, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, someone will take your place. They always do. You do this 6 days a week. Sunday is for God, or at least that's what the priest says. But you've spent plenty of Sundays chasing down a lost cow, hauling buckets from the well, or scrubbing the family's clothes with cold water and clenched teeth. Rest is a theory, a myth, like kindness from the tax collector or shoes that fit. You don't get days off. You don't get sick days. You don't get to be tired. You just are tired, constantly. It seeps into your bones, curls behind your eyes, weighs down your limbs like an invisible chainmail shirt. You breathe through it. You pray through it. You survive in spite of it. Now imagine doing all of this while hiding who you are. Imagine lifting sacks of grain while making sure your voice doesn't sound too soft. Imagine herding sheep while pretending not to notice the shepherd's son. Imagine digging ditches with boys who joke about men like that, while you smile and nod and hope your face doesn't give you away. Labour here isn't just physical, it's emotional espionage. Every task, every hour, every interaction is another round of don't get caught. Every word must be measured. Every gesture must be edited. You live in constant revision. You don't just work, you perform. And if the performance fails, the consequences aren't a bad to review. They're fire, rope, silence. There's a rhythm to the work. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's repetitive. Chop, drag, drop. Lift, step, wince. You count the beats not because you care how many there are, but because it keeps your mind from unravelling. You've learned that staring at the dirt helps. If you don't look up, no one expects you to smile, or nod, or meet their eyes. Eye contact is dangerous. Eye contact leads to questions. And questions in this world are like trapdoors with teeth. Someone calls to you. You flinch. Just for a second. Then you stand, straighten your spine, smile with your mouth, but not your eyes. The boy from 2 huts down wants to trade shifts on fence mending. You agree too quickly. He notices. Or maybe he doesn't. But now you're wondering if your voice cracked when you said his name. If your hands shook. If he saw the way you looked at him last winter. That moment you've tried to forget. You spend the next 2 hours building fences and dismantling yourself. In a better world, work might mean purpose. Here, it means erasure. You dig the same holes your father dug, carry the same wood, bind the same sheaves, and with every repetition, a little more of you disappears. You watch your hands, cracked, stiff, calloused, and wonder when they stopped feeling like yours. You try to remember what your laugh sounded like before it became a sound you rehearsed. Sometimes you sing to yourself, softly under your breath, when no one is near. Not songs from church. Not the ribald tavern tunes the other boys belt out. Just fragments, melodies with no words, feelings you can't say aloud, turned into sound. Once, someone heard you. They laughed, asked if you were possessed. You didn't sing again for 3 weeks. There's no division between personal and public. Your labour is performed in full view of everyone, family, neighbours, strangers, God, always God. And because you're not married, not betrothed, not pursuing prospects, every action is observed. Every refusal to flirt with a milkmaid, every gentle word, every friendship that lasts too long or ends too abruptly, or they watch. The older men shake their heads. The younger ones joke, loud, cruel, with too much laughter. And the women? The women are harder to read. Some watch you with pity. Some with suspicion. One or two, the ones who have also refused the world's script, watch you with something that might be recognition. But no one says anything, because to speak it would be to share it, and to share it would be to risk everything. You try to overcompensate, everyone does. You chop wood harder than needed. You shout during work songs. You make offhand jokes you don't mean, about women you don't want, in voices that aren't yours. You laugh too loud. You nod too fast. You play the role so well it starts to fit, and then you catch your reflection in a puddle, and it doesn't look like you. Just some tired actor trapped in a costume he can't take off. By midday, your hands are bleeding. The axe slipped. You didn't notice at first. Pain takes a while to register when everything already hurts. You wrap your hand in a cloth. The blood soaks through. Your brother sees it and shakes his head like you're an idiot. You've gone soft, he says. You daydream too much. He's right, you do. You think about cities, oceans, poems you've never read, faces you can't name but still long for. You think about what it might feel like to be touched, gently, without consequence, and not as a punishment. You think about leaving, then you shake it off, because it's not useful, and around here, if it's not useful, it's dangerous. As you stack wood for the communal oven, you hear the smith's apprentice talking to his friends. He's loud. He wants to be overheard. He tells a story about a man caught with another man in a town not far from here. The story shifts as he tells it. Sometimes it's a noble, sometimes a monk, sometimes a merchant. Always a villain. Always punished. There's laughter, fake outrage. One boy pretends to gag. You laugh too. Quietly. At the right moment. Later you vomit behind the stable. It starts to rain. The field turns to muck. Your boots sink with each step like they're trying to escape. The wind cuts sideways across your face. Your hands go numb. Your feet blister. Your jaw aches from clenching. You keep going. Because stopping means explaining. And explaining is impossible. By evening, your body is given up. Your fingers are curled into claws. Your spine screams with every movement. Your tunic is soaked. Your skin is raw. Your ribs feel bruised, though you haven't been hit. Not physically. You eat dinner in silence. A crust of bread. A smear of something that used to be cheese. The fire is low. No one speaks. You stare at the flames and think about falling into them. Not out of despair. Out of exhaustion. You excuse yourself early. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because your performance is slipping, and you need to be alone to rehearse for tomorrow. You don't remember when work stopped feeling like a task and started feeling like your entire personality. There's nothing else. No hobbies. No dreams you can say out loud. Just motion, digging, mending, carrying, obeying. You've become efficient at it. Maybe too efficient. Some days you get things done faster than others, and that draws attention. So you slow down. You smear the dirt on your face like war paint. You grunt when lifting heavy things, not because you need to, but because you're supposed to. Even your pain has to be performative. Your body is no longer a home. It's a tool, a liability, a project under surveillance. You carry it through each day like a bucket with a hole in it, always leaking something vital. At night, you lie still, too tired to sleep. Your hands throb. Your back hums with dull mechanical pain. You stare at the thatched roof, count the rats. The ache in your limbs is only matched by the ache inside your chest. That hollow stretch of silence where your real self once lived. Once, you caught your reflection in a basin of water. You didn't recognize it. The eyes were yours. The mouth, maybe. But the rest? The set of the jaw. The way the shoulders curled inward. The way the whole posture screamed, "Please don't look too closely." That wasn't you. That was the version the world had allowed to survive. You dream of work. You dream of fields of sweat, of never-ending furrows stretching into a grey horizon. You dream of carrying something, always carrying. Buckets, grain, firewood, guilt. You dream of someone reaching for your hand, and you pulling away too quickly. You wake up ashamed of yourself. Even in dreams you can't be honest. Sometimes you sneak moments. Small ones. Slivers of space between chores. Between glances. You sit behind the barn for 5 minutes and hum a song that doesn't belong to anyone. You catch a glimpse of someone's smile, not directed at you, and let it warm your ribs anyway. You carve a line into the dirt with a stick and pretend it's poetry. And these moments are microscopic, pathetic, and sacred. They keep you alive in ways pottage can't. There's an old man in the village who doesn't speak much. He sits near the edge of the square, always carving wood. No family, no friends. People say he's mad. They say he talks to birds. They say he once kissed a soldier and survived. You don't know if any of that's true, but sometimes you watch him, and sometimes he looks back, and neither of you says a word. But for those few seconds, the world doesn't feel quite so empty. The church says labour is holy. The priest reminds you weekly that your suffering brings you closer to God, that work is your path to salvation, that humility is a virtue, that pride is sin. But it's not pride you're worried about, it's disappearing, being too good at this pretending, losing the thread of who you really are, forgetting the softness in your voice when you were 12, forgetting the name of the boy you almost kissed, forgetting what you would have been if you were allowed to choose. So you hold on to little things, a pebble you keep in your pocket, a line from a story you once overheard, a crooked smile, a half-written thought. You hold them like relics, because no one's building a shrine to someone like you. You have to build it yourself, one invisible brick at a time. The year wears on. Harvest ends, winter begins. The work changes but never stops. You mend fences, chop wood, haul water over ice. Your hands crack until they bleed. Your breath fogs in the morning like steam from a dying fire. You bury your longing in labour. You bury your identity in obedience. You bury your truth in silence. But it's still there. Under the weight of the mud and the rules and the long, endless days, still glowing like the last coal in a fire that refuses to go out. You know your place, not because someone told you, but because it's been carved into every wall, written on every face, and muttered through every sermon, since you were old enough to carry firewood. You are not important. You are not noble. You are not anything except useful, for now. You live at the bottom of everything, below the lord and lady who own the land you bleed into, below the priest who owns your soul, below the reeve, the bailiff, the guildman, and the scribe who writes your name wrong on purpose because he knows you can't read it anyway. You are a peasant. And if there were a category lower than that, you'd be promoted. There's no upward mobility, no striving, no ambition. The ladder is nailed to the ceiling, and you're in the basement, holding the broom they beat you with. Even if you were straight, cis, pious, and mute, even if you fit every mould they handed you, you'd still be poor, still invisible, still nothing. But you're not those things. You're something worse. You're different, which means you're dangerous, which means they're watching. You don't make eye contact with your betters, not because it's polite, but because it's risky. If the Lord catches you looking at him wrong, you're insolent. If the lady catches you not looking at her, you're disrespectful. If the priest catches you looking at anyone too long, you're already halfway to the stake. You learn to keep your gaze in the middle distance. 1,000-yard stare for a life that never changes. The village hierarchy is small, petty, and absolute. At the top, the Lord. He's rarely here. When he is, he arrives on horseback, wears a hat that cost more than your life, and smells like imported wine and contempt. You bow. You smile. You pray he doesn't notice you. Below him the steward, who acts like the Lord when the real one's away. He doesn't own the land, but he owns your fear. He counts your grain, taxes your chickens, fines you for breathing too hard during Lent. Then the priest. He knows your sins before you do. His sermons are equal parts threat and gossip. He hears everything, sees everything. He says he can read souls, but mostly he reads expressions and assigns motives that match his mood. Below them, the guildsmen, the merchants, the freemen, men who own tools, men who know Latin, men who wear belts with buckles. And then there's you, wearing a rope as a belt, holding your tongue like it's cursed, keeping your hands busy so your heart doesn't speak. If you're a man, you're expected to work, marry, and reproduce like a loyal ox. If you don't, if you hesitate, people notice. If you're a woman, you're expected to serve, birth, and obey. If you don't, if you question, people notice. And if you exist outside of that binary, if you fall in love in the wrong direction, if you desire without permission, if your body doesn't play by the rules, they don't just notice, they prepare. The punishment for stepping out of line isn't always immediate. That would be merciful. Sometimes it's slow, social, subtle. You get passed over for extra grain. You get asked questions with too much weight. You get watched while you work. One day, you notice someone's carved a symbol into your door. A crude figure. A warning. You scrub it away. It comes back. You stop scrubbing. You stop asking. Because shame is a message everyone understands. The village has a way of letting you know when you've been marked. It's not always words. That would be too easy. No, it starts with space. People begin to give you a little more of it. Not respectfully. Not like you're sacred. More like you're contagious. Like one wrong touch might infect their sons with softness. You notice it first at the well. Someone steps back when you approach. Then again at market, when the baker forgets your name even though you've lived 2 huts from him your whole life. The worst is at Mass, when everyone slides a little farther down the pew. No one says anything, but everyone says everything. The children are faster, crueler. They haven't learned subtlety yet. They point, they mimic, they whisper jokes with your name woven in, clumsily. They call you something. The word changes by region, by accent, by year. But you know what it means. Always. Even when they don't. One throws a rock. It misses. You don't react. You never do. Because if you show pain, it confirms what they think you are. Too soft. Too strange. Too much. You become a mirror, reflecting their suspicion, giving nothing back. The priest once preached an entire homily on Sodom. It wasn't subtle. The crowd was silent, the air thick with implication. He never looked at you directly, but afterward, 2 men from the village invited you to help with clearing branches from the road. When you arrived, there was no one else there. Just silence. And 2 pairs of eyes that didn't blink enough. They didn't hurt you. Not then. They just stood too close, smiled too long, said things with their tone that their words never quite delivered. You got the message. You didn't go back to church the next week. The priest noticed. He came to your door the day after that. Your father apologised for you. He didn't know why. No one ever does. But apologies are currency here, and yours are running low. He said you'd been sick, that you'd lost your way, that you were working on being better. He said it in front of your mother, in front of your siblings, in front of the entire street. You said nothing. What could you say? The truth would have cracked the sky open. The concept of justice here isn't about fairness. It's about order. It's about keeping people in the place they were born into, whether or not that place fits. It's about making examples. About reminding everyone what happens to those who don't conform. When the miller's son was caught kissing another boy behind the grain storehouse, he disappeared the next day. They said he went to help an uncle in the north. You don't believe in that uncle. You don't believe anyone does. But no one questions it. The silence is always louder than the lie. There are punishments, of course. Real ones. If someone's caught, truly caught, without a family to protect them or a bribe to offer, it gets ugly. Stocks, lashings, exile. The worst? Public penance. You've seen it. A man stripped to the waist, paraded through the village square, wearing a sign that says sodomite in red paint. The crowd throws rotten vegetables, mud, words. The priest walks behind him reciting psalms. Some say that's merciful, that it's a warning instead of a noose. You wonder what it's like to be forced to carry your shame out loud when you've been doing it in secret your whole life. And yet, for all the power they wield, for all the humiliation they deal out, you've begun to see something else. Cracks. Tiny ones. There's a boy in the next village who wears a sash that's too bright, who walks with a rhythm that's too elegant, who always volunteers to help the older men, but never joins the others in their bragging. There's a widow who never remarried, who tends her own garden and has 3 cats and sometimes walks with the midwife. Arms linked, smiles hidden in quiet conversation. There's a nun who sings like she's choking on joy. You start to realise not everyone fits. Some just fake it better. You start to realise maybe survival isn't about becoming invisible. Maybe it's about learning when not to be seen. You stop speaking as much. Not out loud. Not in ways people can measure. You still greet the reeve when he walks by. You still say amen when the priest's voice rises like judgment wearing a smile. You still respond when your name is called. But inside, where the words used to live, you've grown quieter. You don't finish your thoughts. You cut your own stories short. You edit your memories before you remember them. You begin to lose your voice the way old people lose teeth, slowly and with too much bleeding. This is what the hierarchy wants. It doesn't just want obedience. It wants obedience that feels like your idea. You learn to laugh when expected. Not too much, not too little, just enough to seem normal, to seem harmless. You nod when someone says something cruel, just so they won't say it to you. You shake your head when someone mentions that story from the next village, the one about the two men found together. You shake your head like everyone else, but inside, your heart clenches like a fist, because you don't feel disgust. You feel recognition. You feel fear. You feel envy, because at least they weren't hiding. Even in being caught, they were seen. And that, in a strange way, feels braver than anything you've ever done. There's a night when your mother says something. You're sitting near the hearth, stirring the pot, and watching it bubble like it might give you answers. She doesn't look at you when she speaks. Her voice is soft, even, almost kind. You should marry soon, she says, before people start to wonder why you haven't. She doesn't say it like a threat, but it lands like one, because she knows, or at least suspects. And in this world, suspicion is almost worse than proof. It gives people room to imagine, to invent, to prepare. You nod, because that's what you do now. Your cousin married last month. He's younger than you? Barely 16? The girl was 15, maybe. They didn't look happy, but they looked relieved. Because now they're part of the story, the script, the structure. No one will ask them the wrong questions. No one will whisper at the well. They're safe. Or safer. You watched the ceremony from the edge of the crowd, smiled when expected, clapped when everyone else did, but your stomach twisted like a wet rag. Not because you envied them, but because you almost did. Because a part of you, the part that's tired of being watched, of being judged, of being other, wanted that illusion, that camouflage. You went home and wept in silence. Not from sadness, from exhaustion. Hierarchy doesn't need to punish you directly. It only needs to remind you that you're outside of it. You're not a lord, not a freeman, not even a father, a husband, a groom, or a suitor. You are something else. Something the system has no space for. And if the system has no space for you, then you are already an offence. Even if you never touch anyone, even if you never speak the truth, even if you die pretending, you're still guilty. You wonder sometimes what your funeral would be like. Would anyone say your name? Would they bury you with a blessing? Or just a hole and a prayer that God looks away? You've seen unblessed graves. The ones on the edge of town. The ones marked only with stone and rumour. The ones people pass without looking. You've asked who they belong to. No one answers. They just walk a little faster. But even here, even at the bottom of the bottom, you find moments of defiance. You find them in glances, in silences that are shared, not lonely, in a hand brushing against yours while passing a bundle of wheat, in someone letting you borrow a scarf, even though you didn't ask, in a boy who doesn't join in when the others laugh too hard. None of it is loud, none of it is brave, but it exists, and that's enough. You once helped repair the roof of a widow's house. She didn't ask questions. She just handed you a bowl of stew and said, "Thank you." Her voice didn't sound like pity. It sounded like someone who knew what it meant to live outside the lines. That night, she gave you a candle stub, said it was for warmth, but she handed it to you the way people pass relics, gently, carefully, like it meant something. You still have it. You've never lit it. But sometimes, when the world feels like it's closing in, you hold it. And you remember that not everyone in the hierarchy agrees with it. Some just don't have the power to say so. There is no moment in your day that isn't touched by the church. It owns the morning. When the bell rings and you're expected to stop what you're doing, bow your head, and thank a silent sky for letting you wake up in a life you didn't ask for. It owns the afternoon. When you recite prayers in a tongue you don't understand, hoping the rhythm makes up for the content. It owns the evening. When you kneel beside your bed of straw and beg forgiveness for thoughts you haven't even had yet. The church is not just a building. It's not just a man in robes with a booming voice and suspiciously nice boots. It's the air you breathe, the rules you follow, the threat that watches you from every corner of your soul. And if you're someone like you, someone wrong, then God isn't your father. He's your warden. The church has a name for what you are. It doesn't matter what name you give yourself. You can whisper words into the dark, names that mean gentle or true or mine, but it won't change theirs. Sodomite. It's not a description. It's a sentence. A word that doesn't just describe your love. It criminalizes it, weaponizes it, turns your feelings into a list of offences. Lust, perversion, unnatural desire. As if your heart were a poorly stored root cellar, and something inside it went mouldy. You've sat through the sermons. You've heard the priest thunder from the pulpit, voice full of fire and fear, spinning tales of sulphur and cities turned to salt. He speaks in absolutes, in condemnations, in carefully constructed horrors. His voice breaks when he talks about temptation, and you don't think it's from sadness. You sit in the pew, hands folded, face blank, mouth reciting words with the passion of a damp sponge. And inside, you're screaming. Not from guilt, not anymore, but from exhaustion. From hearing yourself used as a cautionary tale week after week by a man whose eyes linger too long on the choir boys. You've tried confession? Of course you have. You sat in the booth, heart pounding, hands shaking, and said everything except the truth, because the truth would have been a trapdoor. You gave them half sins instead. Impure thoughts, envy, sloth. Something edible. Something survivable. And even that felt like cutting off a piece of yourself and feeding it to the fire. The priest absolved you, but you didn't feel clean. You just felt smaller. Faith is supposed to be a shelter. Here, it's a surveillance system. God is watching. The saints are watching. Your neighbours are watching. And if none of them catch you, the angels are taking notes. Every glance, every thought, every ache in your chest that leans towards someone with the wrong body. It all counts. It all adds up. You don't get to be tempted. You only get to be guilty. The church controls everything. The calendar, the law, the land, your vocabulary. Even your silence is subject to interpretation. If you speak too little, you're hiding something. If you speak too much, you're drawing attention. If you say nothing at all, they'll speak for you, until the words they put in your mouth become more believable than anything you could say yourself. And what you feel, that's not yours either. That's the devil. At least that's what they tell you. There are over 100 holy days on the calendar. They don't feel holy. They feel mandatory. Mass at dawn. Fasting at noon. Confession at night. Days where you're not allowed to eat meat. Days where you're not allowed to smile. Days where you're not allowed to think about certain things. Especially the ones you think about most. You're not sure what you're celebrating anymore. The birth of a saint? The death of another? The miracle of someone being set on fire and not screaming too loudly? It blurs together into one long, incense-soaked procession of forced reverence and aching knees. And then there's Lent. 40 days of saying no to yourself. You fast, you pray, you avoid indulgence. Which is difficult when your daily indulgence is half a bowl of bean sludge and a dream you're not allowed to have. You're expected to repent, to reflect, to scour your soul for anything unclean, which, if you're like you, means everything. You are the sin. You can't scrub hard enough. Sex is a paradox in this world. It's sacred and filthy, holy and shameful, necessary and forbidden. If you're married, you're expected to do it. If you're not, you're expected to pretend you've never heard of it. If you enjoy it too much, you're suspicious. If you don't enjoy it at all, you're broken. And if your desire doesn't point in the right direction, then you're evil. It's that simple. No nuance, no curiosity, no room for kindness. There are rules about everything. When to marry, how to lie with your spouse, where not to touch, which positions are acceptable, what days are allowed, what prayers must be said before and after. There's an entire theology of control, a bureaucratic pamphlet of human misery written by men who confuse purity with punishment. There are diagrams, sermons, scrolls, all dedicated to making sure that no one experiences joy by accident. Science, such as it is, offers no refuge. The best minds of your era believe your urges are a humoral imbalance. Too much heat, not enough bile, possibly caused by unripe fruit or excessive imagination. You could be treated with herbs, with bleeding, with being locked in a small room and prayed over until your mind corrects itself. They think desire is an illness, and the cure, obedience, silence, marriage, as if proximity to a woman might reset your internal compass, as if forcing yourself to hold the right hand, kiss the right mouth, look into the right eyes will straighten the knot in your chest and undo every thread you've spent your life trying to keep hidden. You've heard whispers about monasteries, places where the rules are stricter, but the scrutiny is different, where men live among men, where some find peace, where others find something else. You once saw a monk glance too long at another. Nothing happened. But you remembered that glance, memorized it, replayed it in your head like a secret hymn, not because it was bold, but because it was real. And in a world that demands you fake everything, real is dangerous and holy. Superstition is everywhere. If the crops fail, it's because someone sinned. If someone falls ill, it's because of bad thoughts. If two men are seen talking too often, too closely, too gently, the weather might punish everyone for it. They don't need evidence. They just need a reason to be afraid. And you are a very convenient reason. There's a story about a man who wore red too often. The villagers said it was a sign. No one asked what it meant. They just dragged him from his home one night and shaved his head to shame the devil out of him. He left the next morning. No one's seen him since, but his name lives on as a warning, a punchline, a prayer for other people's children. You've never worn red. You think you look good in it, but you don't tempt fate anymore. Not in colour, not in tone, not in anything. They say God sees everything, which would be comforting if he didn't look so much like the people who hurt you. When they talk about mercy, it sounds like a negotiation. When they talk about forgiveness, it comes with conditions. When they talk about love, they mean the kind that fits in a registry, under the eye of a priest, sealed with a kiss you can't feel. There's no room in their theology for love that doesn't reproduce. No room for affection that bends. No prayers written for people like you, unless they're asking for your silence, or your suffering, or your disappearance. You've stopped asking questions. Not because you found answers, because the answers found you. Every time you try to imagine a God who would love you fully, someone handed you a sermon explaining why that God was a heresy. Every time you tried to believe your feelings weren't poison, someone pulled out scripture, translated and weaponized. Every time you opened your heart, someone closed it for you, with stone, fire, or shame. So now you don't ask, you just sit, and listen, and pretend the weight on your chest is righteousness, not grief. There are saints who are never canonized, not because they didn't perform miracles, but because their miracles were quiet. They healed without herbs. They offered safety without sacraments. They loved without writing it down. And when they died, their names were spoken only in whispers, passed down like lullabies for children no one would admit existed. You believe in those saints. You pray to them sometimes. Not out loud, not on your knees. Just in your head, while digging, or eating, or folding the same scratchy tunic for the 1000th time. You ask them to keep watch, to forgive you for surviving in secret. You've become fluent in selective belief. You believe in kindness. You believe in grace. You believe in that one line from the gospel that talks about love and leaves out the details. You believe that God sees more than rules, but you say none of it, because belief here isn't personal. It's performative. It's a set of robes you wear in the right company. It's a vocabulary test with consequences. There was a man who used to walk through the forest reciting scripture. Everyone thought he was mad. He quoted passages out of order with a strange cadence and laughed in the middle of blessings. One day he disappeared. They found his hut abandoned, his Bible open to a page about John the Beloved, the disciple Jesus loved. Someone had underlined it. You think about him often. You wonder what he saw in that forest. What version of the divine whispered back? And whether it finally sounded like home. They tell you salvation is free, but everything in this world has a cost. So you give them what they want. You bow your head. You cross yourself. You confess things you haven't done, and bury the things you have. You sit in the pew, and you pray with your mouth while your heart chants its own heresies. And you hope, quietly, dangerously, that maybe God is better than the people who speak for him. You're not feeling well, which is terrifying, Because in the Middle Ages, illness doesn't mean take a day off. It means start your spiritual preparations. You have a cough, that could be the plague. A headache, could be demons. A stomach ache, definitely sin. Or bad stew. Or both. You try to ignore it, try to push through. But your legs are weak, your skin is hot, and your vision keeps blurring in that charming, am I dying or just dehydrated way? And water is risky. So it's probably dying. You sit on a bench made of splinters and questionable stains and wait to feel better. You don't. You think about seeing a doctor. This is a bad idea, because a medieval doctor is not a doctor. He's a man with strong opinions, limited hygiene, and access to knives. His entire education consists of reading Galen by candlelight and using leeches like emotional support animals. He checks your pulse by gripping your wrist and furrowing his brow. Then he declares your humours are unbalanced. All four of them: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. You didn't even know you had bile, let alone two kinds. He prescribes bleeding. Because of course he does. The bleeding is performed with something between a knife and a curse. You sit still while he slices your skin and drains your life into a bowl. The blood is warm. Your dignity is not. You ask if it's helping. He says maybe. He says you should try smelling burnt rosemary and carrying a dried frog in your pocket. You try not to scream. If you're lucky, it's not the plague. If you're unlucky, it is. And you don't just die. You rot. Your lymph nodes swell to the size of apples. Your skin turns black. People stop coming near you. Your family pretends not to know you. The priest gives you last rites through a cloth. If you survive, you're a miracle. If you don't, you're a cautionary tale. Either way, someone will blame your sins. Especially those ones. There's a man in the village who lost his foot. Not to disease, not to wolves, to a bad haircut. You see, he went to the barber for a trim. The barber also does medical things, which includes lancing boils and pulling teeth with tools that look like torture devices in a morality play. This time, the man had a sore on his ankle. The barber poked it, frowned, and said it was a curse. Or maybe poison. Or humours. Who can say? He cut deeper. It got worse. He applied a poultice made of bread, mud, and crushed beetles. That also made it worse. Then came the bleeding, the cauterizing, the leeches. By the end of the week, the man had one less foot and two more ghosts in his house. You learn quickly that healthcare is just a slow-motion gamble. If you live, it's a miracle. If you die, it's God's will. Either way, the church gets to claim victory. Meanwhile, you're lying in bed, hallucinating from fever, wrapped in a blanket that smells like 4 generations of sweat and boiled root vegetables. Someone prays over you. You can't tell if it's out of love or suspicion. Probably both. You hear stories about healing relics. A toenail from a saint. A vial of holy tears. A sliver of a finger bone carried in a box that jingles ominously. These things are supposed to bring health, but mostly they bring lice, and pilgrims, and the flu. Then there's punishment, because sickness isn't the only way you might die. The law is very clear. If you're caught loving the wrong person, the wrong way, it's not just a sin. It's a crime, a spectacle, an invitation for the village to show up and pretend they're watching justice, when really they just want something to break the boredom. You've seen the pillory, you've seen the stocks, you've seen the man who was tied to the post and left for 2 days while people threw onions at his face and rocks at his ribs. They said he was a thief, but they never said what he stole. You wonder if it was a kiss. Executions are public, not because they have to be, because they want them to be. They're theatre, the only kind most people get to see. A hanging is a social event. The town gathers. Children eat stale apples. The priest prays loudly. Everyone acts like this is normal. It is. That's the worst part. Once someone was burned. They said he was unnatural, possessed, a corrupter, a sodomite. You were too young to understand all the words. But you remember the fire. You remember the smell. You remember the way people watched. Some in silence, some with relief, some with smiles. You stood very still. You didn't cry. And that was the day you learned how to disappear without moving. There are diseases with names that sound like curses. Scrofula, the bloody flux, the falling sickness, St. Anthony's fire. You don't know what most of them are, but you know the symptoms. Bleeding from places that shouldn't bleed, sores that sing, fevers that make you say things you regret. You've seen people twist in their sleep and never wake up. You know death well. It walks through your village like it's checking in on friends. You once had a fever dream that someone touched your hand and called you beautiful. You woke up crying. Not because it wasn't real, because it felt more real than anything you'd ever known. No one teaches you how to grieve here, because there's no time, no privacy, no space to feel anything that isn't immediately useful. If someone dies, you dig a hole, you whisper a prayer, and you move on before the next person starts coughing. You once cried for a boy you barely knew. He smiled at you once. You thought maybe, just maybe, he saw something in you. He died 2 weeks later. Fever. Or punishment. Or both. You didn't go to the funeral. You just stood in the woods and screamed into your own hands. You told everyone you had a cold. The world keeps ending. Not in one grand apocalypse, but in waves. A barn burns down. A child goes missing. Someone says a word in the wrong tone, and the priest calls it heresy. The plague returns. A war arrives. The crops fail. The rats get bold. And through it all, no one blinks, because horror is routine. You learn to treat atrocity like weather. You expect it, prepare for it, complain about it, but you never think you can stop it. You just hope you're not in the way when it passes. Some days you wonder if you're already dead, not in the body, but in the soul, in the part that used to dream, the part that used to imagine a life beyond this mud, this hunger, this hiding. You used to think about what it would feel like to love openly. Now you think about what it would feel like to stop pretending for just 1 minute. 1 minute without fear. 1 minute of quiet. There's a myth you once heard, that people like you used to be priests, or prophets, or healers, that long before the church, long before the law, long before the shame, you were sacred. You don't know if it's true, but you believe it, because there has to be a place in history where your love wasn't a sin, even if it's been erased, even if it only lives in whispers, even if the last person who believed it died, tied to a stake with wildflowers in his hands. They've built a system where absurdity is camouflage. You bleed because of humours. You suffer because of sin. You die because of nature. But none of it makes sense. None of it hold up under even the weakest scrutiny. But they say it anyway, loudly, often, confidently, because when everyone agrees to lie together, the lie becomes real. And if you point out the absurdity, you're the problem. You once asked a priest if love could ever be holy. He looked at you for a long time, then said, "Not the kind you mean." You nodded. You didn't ask again. You've stopped expecting justice, or clarity, or peace, but you still expect the sunrise. You still get out of bed. You still help the old woman fix her roof, even though she never thanks you. You still smile at the baker's son, even though he looks away. You still light a candle when no one's watching and whisper a name you've never said out loud. Because absurdity is horror, but survival is defiance. And even here, especially here, that still counts for something. You don't cry anymore. Not because you don't want to, but because it never helps. Crying here doesn't bring comfort. It brings suspicion. Weakness isn't allowed unless it's framed as piety. If you weep during Mass, you're holy. If you weep after someone spits at you, you're dangerous. So you don't cry. You just sit with the feeling, like a wound that never bleeds, never closes, never stops aching. You've become an expert at small tasks. Not because they matter, but because they keep you moving. They keep you from thinking. You sweep floors that are already filthy. You restack the same firewood. You stir the pot until it turns to paste, then ash, then nothing. Sometimes you forget what day it is. Other times you forget what year. But the feeling stays the same, that you're waiting for something. Something that won't arrive. A letter. A look. A version of this life where you can breathe. You think often of escape. Not the dramatic kind. Not dashing off into the night with a sack of bread and stolen shoes. Just leaving. Disappearing. Becoming mist. Or wind. Or legend. You imagine walking until the village is behind you, and no one remembers your name. But you also know how this ends. Someone will ask why you left. Someone will say they always suspected something. And the story they tell about you, the one you'll never get to correct, will last longer than your absence ever could. You catch yourself pretending. Not the daily kind. Not the "I'm just like you" kind, but another kind. Softer. More dangerous. You catch yourself pretending that maybe, just maybe, someone knows. And doesn't care. Someone sees the ache behind your eyes and doesn't flinch. You imagine conversations that never happen. Touches that never land. A glance across the firelight that means more than suspicion. You start talking to yourself. Not out loud, just in your head. Just enough to stay tethered. You narrate your chores. You describe the weather. You name the feelings no one else has ever asked about. You say your own name sometimes. Just to remember, it still sounds human. There's no word for what you feel. Not in your language. Not in theirs. Not in the church's glossary of sins. Nothing that fits. There are words for lust, for crime, for sickness, for shame. But not for this. Not for wanting to sit beside someone in the quiet and not be afraid. Not for wishing you could speak without checking every syllable. Not for dreaming of warmth without the aftermath of guilt. So you stop trying to name it. You just carry it. You walk through the market and imagine lives, not yours, other ones. The woman buying leeks. Maybe she's secretly in love with the midwife. The old man who sells fish. Maybe he once had a lover in a city no one believes exists. The boy who makes too much eye contact. Maybe he knows. Maybe he is. You never ask, but you imagine. You imagine enough to make it feel real for a moment. You build entire histories in your mind. You give people secrets they'll never share, and softness they've never shown. And in doing so, you give it to yourself too, just a little. You long for things you don't understand, not just touch, or safety, or love, but language. You want to say what you are without choking on it. You want to hear someone else say it and not turn to stone. You want a word that doesn't end in punishment. You want a story where the ending isn't fire. There's a part of you that has started to believe in nothing. Not in a nihilistic way, not in anger, just exhaustion. You've spent so long pretending to be okay that now you're not even sure what not okay would feel like. You've adjusted, adapted, hardened. You've wrapped yourself in practicality and dirt and cold. And now survival just feels like something you're supposed to do. Like breathing, or bowing, or forgetting. You look at your hands sometimes and wonder whose they are. They've done so much work. They're cracked, stained, shaped by years of pretending to belong. But they have also held small joys. A piece of bread shared in silence. A hidden flower. A warmth once, long ago, in a moment that was never allowed to be love, but felt like it. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the memory is more real than the life. You've stopped asking to be understood. It's not bitterness. It's math. The cost of honesty is too high. You've done the equations in your head. Every scenario ends in silence, or exile, or worse. So you ration yourself. A thought here, a glance there. You let out just enough to keep from drowning. The rest stays locked inside, like a bird you keep in a box, because letting it fly would mean watching it burn. You used to feel guilty about this. Now you just feel tired. You've considered leaving, not because it would be better somewhere else, but because at least it would be different. You've heard rumours of cities, of coasts, of foreign lands where the rules bend a little, where people disappear into crowds and live unexamined lives. You know, most of that is fantasy, but the idea of being anonymous, fully anonymous, sounds almost holy. You wouldn't be free, but you'd be invisible on purpose, and that's something you've considered staying. Because even though this life is quiet and cramped and cruel, it's yours. You know its corners, its threats, its little cracks of kindness. You've found a way to live inside a system that would rather see you buried. That counts. Not as victory, but as defiance. You watch others grow old. The boy who used to call you names now limps when it rains. The woman who once accused you of being too soft now weeps every Sunday. People who once made you small now seem smaller themselves. Time wins every war. Even the quiet ones. You don't hate them anymore. You don't forgive them either. You've simply outlasted them. You've built a life in the margins of theirs. And you've filled it with things they'll never see. A look that meant something. A word carved into a beam in a house no one visits. A song hummed under your breath that no one else will ever understand. There's a kind of peace in knowing you were never meant to survive. And doing it anyway. Not grandly, not loudly, just steadily. You eat your food. You do your work. You avoid the priest's gaze. You sit with yourself at night and speak to no one, and know, with a certainty you can't explain, that you are still here, still feeling, still wanting, still resisting in ways so quiet no one hears them, except you. And maybe that's enough. The fire's almost out. You're still lying there, wherever there is. The straw beneath you creaks like it knows your name. The walls don't speak. The wind has nothing left to say. You survived another day in a world that never asked you to. You lived. That's enough. Close your eyes. The dark can't see you if you don't move. Sleep.